Today's terrifying video, we're gonna be having a look and continuing our looks at the Clive Barker McFarlane toys. This is Tortured Souls Series 1. This is Figure 2, the Scythe Meister. Grabbing the tape measure. Scythe Meister, if you count the top of his head, he's about 7.5 inches tall. Now granted, he's also got this back carriage, which gives the figure extra height, of course, and takes it to about 8 inches tall. Revisiting the Clive Barker's Tortured Souls, the Scythe Meister does come included with a booklet and a continued part to the saga, the Scythe Meister, 6 Destinies. This is Book 2, The Assassin Transformed. I have honestly not read this myself, but you can see it does give you a fairly substantial read, something you can sit down and check out when you get a chance. I probably will read it, and I do like that at least that I don't have to rip this out of the clamshell to get it actually slid out pretty easily. And on the back there's just an image of what the figure looks like. Put that to the side. Okay, so the Scythe Meister, of course, has to come with a scythe. It would seem rather strange if he didn't come with one. And while this one doesn't really have a whole lot of paint going on, it's an interesting looking design. It's got just a little bit of poseability. Not really all that much, but just gives you a little bit. And of course, being the nature of that, I could also tell you that this would then be a little bit fragile. I kind of wish actually it was given the dark sort of color scheme that we had a look at before when we looked at Agonistus, which actually had those arms that stuck out from his torso. I do wish that the Scythe Meister had a similar sort of color scheme. Now granted, the Scythe does match the coloring of his back framework, which we'll look at in a second, so I would have to probably want to change all of that. So at least the Scythe, for that matter, does, it does fit the color scheme of the rest of the figure. And I have to tell you though, getting the Scythe in his hand is no successful feat. I tried a couple of different various ways to get it on him. I kind of just wedged that over his arm and just kind of, he doesn't so much hold it as you just kind of place it. This hand's basically doing most of the work. You just wedge his fingers in between that little slot section here, and then the other half of the scythe just kind of sits on his fingers. It doesn't do the greatest of jobs, and it doesn't seem like it's functional from the way he holds it, as opposed to, like, it just seems like he's more like displayed with it as opposed to getting a good substantial grip. They could have halved this as well and giving him gripping hands, but at least one thing is if you don't display him with the scythe and you just take this out completely, he's got hands that are just kind of slightly curved that it looks like you could just display him on his own. He also comes with a bunch of other chains too. That's one of the things that you'll notice with a lot of McFarlane releases, is that they just come with excess amounts of chain. Now these chains do have hooks on them, so I mean you can kind of just find places among the figure's sculpt where stuff just could line itself up to it and you can have just drape it on as a result of it. One thing I do want to mention though, and I'm going to talk about this right now, this back little frame that sits in his back is supposed to plug into place. Let me just show you what I'm doing here. These little plugs here fit in theoretically into these little slots. I can tell you it's a nightmare. I feel tortured myself just trying to get everything to line up. And you'll find a lot of times as you're trying to get everything on them, the chains get tangled up. In fact, you can probably see it right now on this makeshift crown that's stretching his face. So you have to untangle it as best you can and then try your best to peg those into place. Now the thing is though, these are plastic. I don't want to put a lot of pressure trying to force those in, because the last thing I want to do is break it. But it seems like this one port here is not nearly deep enough or large enough to fit the frame plug or fit the frame backing here. So a lot of times I might find myself, and you may see it during the course of this review, I may be adjusting this ever so slightly because it falls off a lot. I might even use, and dare I use the the bad word, the G word. I might use some glue. I might just glue that into place and just keep it out of the way and at least keep itself permanently attached to his back. It will be a bit of an issue then if I ever bag this guy away, but at least it's not going to keep falling off. It's just not nearly strong enough plastic that I want to put a lot of force into that. By forcing it into the torso, it just doesn't want to sit in place. And by the way as well, you'll notice that there's a little slot here and here that you could actually take as well the scythe, and it fits just, not the greatest mind you, but it does fit into those slots. Just like so. Oops, just like that, yeah, and you see the back does keep wanting to fall off. It's such a pain because it's such a neat design, and yet I struggle so much trying to get that to stay in place. I might just glue it. I could see myself just ultimately gluing it and calling it a day. So let's do our best to try to plug that into place. Now let's have a look at the figure. Because the figure, despite the detriments of having this be such a pain in the butt, it is such a great looking figure. You can make out, let's see if I can tilt it up there. You can make out there is one eye visible. The other eye is slightly more stretched. I kind of don't like the fact that you can see the eye, in all honesty. I do kind of think it would look nicer if the straps just completely covered over the eyes. But nonetheless, the eye is visible there. You can also see his teeth and everything. Just defining the term tortured, this poor guy. Just think of like the individual areas of his face, his ears and everything just stretched across this back, I want to say like crown. It's not quite a crown, but it's got some interesting like scissors, and it kind of looks like they're individual like symbols, but then upon closer inspection you can see that they're like scissors and spikes and stuff like that. The interior cavity, where the back of his head is, this is where it's been chained, and we got a total of, what, 7 chains attaching themselves then to the back crown, or the back carriage. It sounds good on paper, I'll give it that, and it looks good physically, but it is an absolute nightmare just kind of plug everything into place and get that to stay in place. One of the things that he does also have is this little side arm, which has actually a very similar sort of makeup, and you could imagine that this would attach itself maybe to one of the victim's heads. And I don't know if he carries it around with him, but it's pretty neat that it's got some posability there. Hinged, hinge, hinge, and hinge. So 4 individual hinges there. We'll just kind of move the arms out of the way. He's a much thinner build character, still relying on the blacks and the blues to showcase a lot of fantastic looking sculpt there. Now it's Clive Barker design, so I mean, no strangers once again to Hellraiser. You probably will see a lot of this and think to yourself, looks like a Cenobite, which is really not that far removed. It would be interesting if any of the Hellraiser movies had incorporated some of the designs of the tortured souls as these Cenobites. And I don't know if maybe McFarlane had made some agreement with Clive Barker that the designs that were issued for the Tortured Souls line couldn't then be used for future Hellraiser movies. But some of the designs are so cool on these characters, I kind of wish that we had seen them in live action form, like something in an actual Hellraiser movie. This is very much like Pinhead. Like, this reads very much like Pinhead. Much narrower, of course, much thinner, but the flesh that's kind of been peeled away from his torso is very, very much a Pinhead sort of design. And you can just see like all the cool little sculpts there on the shoulders. I love the front collar here. Again, a little bit of that opening area where you can see the tormented and torn flesh of the character here. And he's got a really neat looking skirt. How you got it strapped on either side, and a very long front panel of fabric for his skirt, and then how it splits on the sides. There is like he's like wearing a thong. Wondering if actually this is a female or male, because like the build again kind of makes me think it's a male, but just a very thin male. It could very well be a female. Got some really, really cool, and I love how this is soft rubber. Best way to go, soft rubber. Granted, they don't have a lot in the way of poseability anyways, but the soft rubber just flows, I think, a little bit better than giving it plastic. Or like a soft plastic. That's what we got here. Peg holes on the undersides of feet, but really, truth be told, none of the figures really struggle at all just standing up. I mean, despite the fact he's got this loose carriage on the back, the figure does stand. But I mean, again, if you do need a display stand, luckily at least they were smart enough to put peg holes on the undersides of their feet. So really you could use a display stand for any number of them. Just wish this wasn't so much the issue. Forcing, plugging it back in, falling back out. Guaranteed, I'm gonna either give it my best to get that wedged in there, or ultimately I'm just gonna settle. I'm just gonna say to myself, I'm done with it, get some glue going. Poseability on the Scythe Meister, the head does rotate, and luckily they've given it enough excess chain that you can still rotate the head and the chain's not being immediately plugged and pulled. Granted, excuse me, granted you wouldn't want to turn it too much. Because, I mean, you do any sharp, real drastic turns, you may potentially pull some of the chains from the back socket of his head. The arms do hinge upward, and if you can move this out of the way here, both arms hinge. You've got a swivel on the bicep on this arm. You've got no swivel on the bicep here, however you have a swivel on the forearm. I don't know, just makes no sense to me. Articulation is all over the place. Articulation in the hands, the wrists, nothing in the waist, and then you've got forward back motion on the legs, no articulation in the knees, and no articulation in the feet. That's basically all you're going to get. Just before actually we wrap up this review, he's got a couple of little extra, like I said, chains running down from the back here. A couple of little hooks that you can then attach to the extra chain that we looked at, and it's just a matter of just hooking one hook over the other, connecting the two, and then you just got some extra, you've got some extra chain that you can drape. But this one's kind of neat though, that this one chain has kind of like a sword or like a little sharp dagger that you can have him holding. But again, kind of like the same thing with the scythe, he doesn't really hold it as much as the hand just kind of stays open and you drape the weapon into his hand instead. Despite a backpack that just didn't want to stay in place, I'm probably going to have to either force that in or just settle it and just glue the sucker right into his back. Despite that, I love the design of this character. I love the stretched face upon the back crown, that back circular frame that he's got on the back of his head. He still sticks to the same core design of a lot of these Tortured Soul characters. Really cemented in a black, strapped, almost bondage look design to them. But still, each of the characters do bring different elements to the table. This particular one brought the element of having that little back frame. And despite the fact that this is such a pain in the butt to get in place and to stay in place, I think the design really is a successful feat. Once again, kudos to the folks over at McFarlane Toys for producing this figure. He's not probably one of my favorites from this lineup, but he definitely has a really neat appeal to him that I do like quite a bit, despite the fact that I felt tortured this entire review just trying to get that blasted backpack in place. Today we were continuing our looks at the McFarlane Toys. This was Tortured Souls Series 1, and this was Figure 2, the Scythe Meister. If you guys like this video, certainly hit it with a like down below, and if you want to stay tuned for more spookerific reviews during the month of Spotober, make sure you hit that little subscribe button down below as well. I know most of you have, but if you haven't and you're new to this channel, come on in, and there's definitely going to be more videos lined up for the rest of this month. As always, guys, thanks for watching, as you always do. I'll see you next time.